About 382 AD, in the days of Jerome, known for the Latin Vulgate, a new term began to circulate in Bible scholarship, according to R.H. Charles. Certain texts of historical value, and even canon, were now labeled as something other than inspired scripture. The very concept is a clear redefining of books already in existence, and in most cases, text recorded as inspired scripture and Bible canon now somehow in question by those without any such authority. This paradigm remains today even further rooted, as if it ever represented the historical approach to these Old Testament texts, as some vet as truth. How do these texts stand up to the Torah test? The answer on many of these books will likely shock especially scholars who have never actually conducted such research, which becomes evident. It's not in their paradigm. This canon was already chosen before there were Pharisees in Jerusalem and before there was ever a Catholic Church. Those factions do not get to legitimately form councils to vote on that which was already settled fact long before, even in archaeology. You are entering a zone for truth with our new Apocrypha test series. Follow along, and together we will dispel the myths of modern scholarship. And man, are they profoundly lacking in intellect on this topic, you will see. Not anymore. Download your copies of Volume 1 and Volume 2 of our comprehensive Apocrypha research, free in eBook today, or get your copies at apocryphatest.com. All links are there. We now begin. It's time to address the timeline of Tobit. When slapping down challenges based on this, it is clear these supposed scholars have never actually run a timeline and understood this. Very clear. We will. In the next video, we'll cover the ironclad documentation of an archangel of healing, even in the modern canon. Oops! What? Yeah, not sure how scholars miss that and then claim he doesn't exist because his name is not used. That is not very bright. Anyway, we'll then deal with that and then discuss how a demon can smell and touch. And by that point, all this nonsense is pretty much done. There'll be a doctrine that we'll cover in Tobit's tithe, which is one of the biggest they pick on, and we will obliterate that there. But it's time to understand biblical giving, and Tobit was, again, famous for that. And the clarity in this book is amazing when it comes to tithing. Basically, what did it look like in the Bible days? Well, by the way, it hasn't really changed. Then we'll take a video and cover the historicity of Tobit as inspired scripture, which very extensive, well-founded, until the illiterate Catholic Jerome set it aside as a hidden text. That's what he did, and it was a terrible move, and for everyone to fall for it is even worse. Basically, it was inspired scripture up until that point, and it remains so. He didn't have the authority to change that. He was no expert. Changing the Old Testament, I mean, come on, who do you think you are, Jerome? Nor did any Pharisee have such authority at any time in all of history, nor has any pope. I mean, nobody can go back and change the Old Testament, which was already determined long before. Most definitely not the Protestant Church 1,000 years after that. That's completely ludicrous. So let's deal with the next unfounded scoffing, called a position in scholarship, yet incredibly wrong, and it is negligence for a scholar to not bother to chart this on a timeline, nor to forget history, nor to ridicule an ancient text because there are different numbers recorded between the KJV version, the Catholic Bible versions, and even the Dead Sea Scrolls. And yes, there are different numbers, yes. A Bible scholar, though, should work to reconcile such, not use that as a point to ridicule. Nonsense. However, that should be no surprise. I mean, it happened in Genesis. So if those scholars were honest men, using the same criteria and not a stricter criteria for the books called Apocrypha, they prove to not be honest men, unfortunately, in that regard, then they would have to then set aside Genesis as Apocrypha based on, well, their own dumb criteria. It's insanity. Of course, no one would ever do that. Equally so, they shouldn't dare to do so with Tobit for this reason. And none of the other reasons are good either. So there you go. Let's go to one of Google's favorites, and this is normal for most of scholarship, who says the same thing here. Really, this already tells you, it's not reliable, because you already know that Google, well, they don't bother to test the trash that they call or prefer as what they say are the facts. This one, though, really proves to be a really lousy source. Many times over, we've used it before, and just, I mean, it's so disappointing to see what these guys say in just anemic scholarship that has no meat, no teeth whatsoever. Basically, this is the time in which we live. We all know that. The fact checkers and preferred sources are many times the very worst when it comes to research. So this is why, folks, we have to prove all things, hold fast that which is good, as Paul admonished, 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Now, Google is supposed to be the bastion of truth, yet is one of the biggest liars in the content they prefer. Clearly. We see it all the time. Now, this is from Compelling Truth, except these guys, well, need to be compelled to tell the truth much of the time because they don't. Sorry. Facts are facts. This is representative, though, of the objections one sees regarding the book of Tobit, especially among Protestant scholars. And they are like a broken record. They all get in line and in lockstep, and they just say the same things, and they're all wrong. Some historical and theological errors. Now, we're going to get to the theological part in another video. This one's about historical timeline issues specifically. In the work have been noted. Okay, so it's, again, anemic. He doesn't commit to anything, It's been noted. That's all he says. Well, what's that even mean? It's a dumb way to say something. That's what it is. You've got people searching Google to find out whether they should read the book of Tobit. And rather than encouraging them, go ahead and read it and test it as you should as an actual scholar, these guys are trying to cast doubt. They've been noted. What does that even mean? Nothing. That's what it means. It basically means they have not researched this at all. They should be able to answer the question. I mean, this is the problem with modern scholarship. They leave the questions out there, and they simply don't bother to research and get the answers for the regular folk like you and I. Now, among the historical problems noted is that Tobit 1:15 incorrectly notes. Is it incorrect? Actually, no, it's not incorrect. It is historically correct. Here's what he says. That Sennacherib was Shalmaneser's son, rather than the son of Sargon II. Oops. Except that is not abnormal. In the Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, nor even Egyptian history, those scholars just don't know history, and this scholar repeats their objections without conducting any research either. I mean, that is the epitome of ignorance. Also, Tobit implied he was alive during the reign of Jeroboam I in 930 BC. Where does he do that? Oh, oops, not in the 1611 King James. It's not there. But at his death, he was noted as 117 years old. Ooh, wait. In the King James, that's not the same, because he's not even reading the King James. This appears a Protestant website that's supposed to be giving answers based on the Protestant platform, and this joker, and I mean joker, can't even read the 1611 King James. Instead, he's going to a Catholic version, which is what this shows, because it's the Catholic version that shows Jeroboam I. That's not in the text. That's added by the Catholics. Erroneous, absolutely, but it's false. It's not in the KJV. 117 years is the Catholic number. It's not the KJV number. So, now we're going to deal with the 117 years on a timeline next, because it's actually not problematic either. But where does Tobit say in the 1611 KJV he was alive during the reign of Jeroboam I? Nowhere. Nowhere credible. Again, Catholic version, nonsense. No doubt Catholics have added to Scripture and taken away on many things. In fact, we've noted in some of the margin notes, we stopped doing it in this publication because there were just so many. We'd be noting so often that, the Catholic version reads differently, or the Catholic version doesn't have this verse, or skips this, or skips that, or skips this. Why? Because the Catholic versions are not credible, folks. That's just a fact. That's why we use the 1611 KJV. Now, is that perfect? No. Even Genesis is not perfect in the 1611 KJV. If you think it is, then you better go look up the name of YHWH, which has been replaced with Lord 6,800 times. That's not a small thing. Okay, so basically, though, it does not even on Tobit's age, apply as a credible source. So he ridicules, though, just the Catholic versions. It's a straw man argument, per se. It's easy to pick on the Catholics because, well, Catholic scholars are lousy at research, even worse than Protestant scholars and rabbis. I mean, even worse. It's just terrible. We've seen some of the dumbest things, such as they'll say, oh, the Sabbath isn't even in Genesis 2:2 and 2:3. It never uses the word Sabbath. You mean in English? Because in Hebrew, the word Sabbath is there in both passages. Yeah. See, for them to not know those kinds of things and call themselves Bible scholars, you've got to be kidding. So, basically, though, it doesn't address the KJV in this article, which is really gross negligence. I mean, you're a Protestant scholar, you ought to go just look and see what the KJV says if you're going to ridicule a Catholic copy. However, this is more profound, as this scholar and many others do basically not even know the difference between Nebuchadnezzar and his father's exploits. See, as Nebuchadnezzar was not the one who first sacked Nineveh, the destruction of Nineveh. That wasn't Nebuchadnezzar. It was his father. See, and that changes the entire timeline, and they mess that up as well. Actually, the details given in Tobit tie perfectly here, especially if one uses what we believe the right age for Tobit, which we note in our publication. We believe accurately, is the accurate measure. However, we're going to discuss 4 different timelines of possibilities based on Tobit's age, which is recorded differently in different versions. Okay, fine. Let's deal with them all. See, the thing is, before writing this blog and accusing Tobit of such, this scholar could have merely done a little research. All 4 timelines still work out just fine for the book of Tobit. And none of them undermine the whole narrative in any sense. So certainly not to the point of being discounted, hidden, and marginalized when Genesis has even bigger problems, actually. But again, we wouldn't do that with Genesis. And we're not saying to do that with Genesis. No one should. But the standard, the measure, is inconsistent for these so-called scholars. And that's dishonest. Now, here's one of our biggest problems with modern scholars. They object in ignorance, and rather than educate themselves, which is their responsibility, they leave the objection unanswered to cause people to stumble, which is classic Phariseeism. This is something we all need to understand, which is why we bring it up. Here's what he says. However, some scholars have proposed ways of handling these concerns that reveal these may or may not truly be inconsistencies. Well, commit to something, be an actual scholar, and do your research, and commit. Which is it? Are these problems or aren't they problems? This is classic Phariseeism. What happens when someone does this? They marginalize the publication. They leave it as, oh, well, we didn't criticize it because we said may or may not. But see, you do criticize it because you didn't commit either way. You didn't prove anything, and literally, this blog says nothing. Here's just one source from Gleason Archer, who identifies that it is a normal practice historically for a king of Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and even Egypt to refer to their predecessor, the next king, as their son, even though they may not actually be their bloodline. Doesn't matter. Why is that surprising to supposed educated scholars, is the real question. In other words, it is a non-issue for Tobit to employ this, especially since Daniel applies the same. Do we then throw Daniel out too? Of course not. Again, inconsistent scholar babble. That's what we have. Because ancient history sees no problem with a king calling the next king his son, whether by blood or not. Period. Again, the Jeroboam point, Jeroboam 1, objection that he brought up, as we mentioned, doesn't even exist in the King James. That's not there. It's not in the timeline. And yeah, sure, it's corrupted in the Catholic version. No surprise. But why does anybody need to defend the book of Tobit against that? The Catholics are well known for screwing up Scripture. They've done it since Jerome and probably before. This guy has no points on this, on anything really. The last one here that we'll deal with, though, next, you'll find with the timeline, it really becomes, again, a non-point. See, he doesn't know the time that Tobit lived because he does not know history. Now, there is some confusion with the different versions of Tobit indeed. No surprise regarding his age. However, it should be the job of a Bible scholar to take things like that and try to reconcile them first. If they can be, of course. In this case, it's actually pretty easy to do so. But they didn't even try, and again, this, repeating illiterate scholarship in an illiterate manner, it just makes it worse. The 1611 KJVA says that Tobit died at 158 years of age. Now, that is very old, even for his time, and looks suspect. There's no doubt about that. Anyone would say so. I mean, if you look at Moses' age, if you look at Joshua's age, and now you're looking at this is, 1,000 years later. So, yeah, maybe something's wrong with that. Well, maybe there is. And we believe there is. We don't believe 158 is accurate. Even for Bible characters, by this time, it really is too long. It's just very odd and seems out of place for good reason. Now, it's no surprise to find numbers corrupted in the King James. Someone changed Genesis, which is missing over 600 years in Genesis 10 from other ancient versions. Watch who changed Genesis. Such as the Greek Septuagint Genesis, the Samaritan Pentateuch Genesis, the Book of Jubilees, and even in the New Testament, the Book of Luke. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And all that evidence is there and challenges that big time. And again, watch that video, we cover it there. But we don't throw out Genesis because of manipulated numbers by Pharisees. No, we don't let them get away with that. And that's the problem with many scholars. But again, they wouldn't throw out Genesis, would they? No, because they're not honest. These scholars, many of them try to cripple this text with a falsehood, as Tobit did not say he would see the destruction of Nineveh. That's one of the litmus tests that this blogger is basically assessing, and many have said. However, on the first timeline, that actually even works out. So, still works if the accurate date is applied. And we believe that's 127 years, and I'll show you why. 158 years old is an oddity, but it still works on a timeline. However, the Catholic version has nothing in verses 11 and 12 regarding Tobit's age, which is where the 158 years appears here. And then we'll show you the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, which also, addresses this, but also in a different verse. It is our opinion this was added to the KJV since Tobit's age is nowhere near 158 elsewhere. Is this a problem for Tobit? Not even remotely. It's not a problem for Genesis. So, be consistent, scholars. Don't make yourself liars. That's all I'll say about that. Then we get to verse 13 and 14 of chapter 14. And this says he died at 127 years of age. The question is, who did? Who's he? If the KJV is correct, and Tobit, of course, is listed before, accurately 158 years, then this is Tobias at 127 years of age. However, this same verse in the Catholic Bible is the only place an age is recorded at all, and it appears to refer to Tobit in wording, not necessarily to Tobias. Now, we'll show you that is 117 years. So 127 makes more sense in every way. And it is attributed by many to Tobit, not Tobias, understand. We then see the Dead Sea Scrolls at 112 years. We'll show you because it's been added, so there's a question about it still. But so that's 112, 117, 127. Those are in the same ballpark. 158 is just way out there. There's no doubt about that. They more closely align. Tobias, the son, not Tobit, the father, heard of the destruction of Nineveh before he died. Well, that's what it says. And it's talking about Tobias, not necessarily Tobit. However, again, it could be Tobit if 127 years is the age. I'll show you. That works out perfectly. And that's why we believe that is the actual age. Who was it taken by? Again, Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar. Notice Nebuchadnezzar, the Nosir, however you want to say it, is not necessarily Nebuchadnezzar. It sounds like it. I get that. And it is in some texts. In this case, it is referring to his father, Nabopolassar. So that's who did that. That's just a fact. Not Nebuchadnezzar. And this name is just as easily transposed to Nabopolassar, in fact. Now, our opinion based on the evidence is, again, the 127 years is the age of Tobit at his death, which is why we say so in the publication. It's there. And there you go. That's why. Did we explain that in the publication? No, we didn't take several pages to do that, but we're doing that in this video because we knew we would. But issues like this are not always cut and dry. However, this is based on the full story. Let's take a look. Remember, compelling truth, which is whom we were addressing in the book, as we even mentioned in the spread there, as far as his objections, that's what we're dealing with, that's what we're testing, and that's why we use the 127 years. He uses the Catholic number of 117 years of age for Tobit, not Tobias, for Tobit. Now, we do not trust the Catholic text either, and number. However, this is the same version, or verse 14. That in the KJV references 127 years, not 158. So it appears the 127's been corrupted to 117, likely, and that 127 is the correct figure, and 158 likely added. Thus, to address this concerned scholar who can't seem to figure this out for himself, nor test it, because he doesn't even try, but likes to leave you and I with questions, we used 127 years of age for Tobit, and guess what? The timeline is perfect with that figure, and it vets as truth, even meeting all of his criteria, which actually is not a criteria of the text at all. Bring in another source, because remember, Tobit was found in Qumran in fragments, and it just so happens there's a fragment which provides Tobit's age, except one thing: they inserted the number as it is in parentheses, so it's still not really trustworthy, and doesn't overrule the King James, especially not the 127, which is the most sensible of all of the figures. Giza Vermes shows this as 112 years of age, closer to the Catholic number. However, the timeline does not become unbelievable, even with this, regardless of the figure. Another version of the Dead Sea Scrolls by Martinez demonstrates the numbers just aren't there. And actually, he translated 85 instead of 58 years, in which Tobit was blinded at the age of 58, according to the KJV, but according to this, it's 85. It's backwards. Now, once again, even that works in a ballpark of 158 total years. It would actually be okay. See, we don't have the original with this number identified, so we all do the best we can, but we don't ridicule numbers that still work out anyway. They still are fine. So, again, we believe the 127 years is the number, and that's why. The addition of 112 years, fully in parentheses, 54 years plus 58 to equal 112, same thing. This language was added in the Giza Vermes edition. Again, it's not in the other edition. So that's why it's there in parentheses. So they did it honestly, but it's added and it's assumed. However, when we see this figure and the Catholic figure, we believe the lower figure in the KJVA is the accurate one. And again, that's the one that vets as perfect. You'll see. So before we begin with our timeline, our logic in the book was answering the 117 years from compelling truth. See how complex this stuff gets? But it doesn't have to be. And we used 127 years, which is the more palatable of the two, the younger, in the KJV. And again, we believe to be the accurate measure. Setting this up, and then here's the timeline. 158 really seems to be added to the KJV, as it's not in the other versions for Tobit's age, and it just seems to be too old for the era. 117 does not seem credible, and 112 was added, but at least it's closer to the 117. Ultimately, We choose to stick with the 1611 KJV here and use the lesser number of 127 years. There is our methodology. There you go. Let's see, though, how this affects the events which are markers involved in Tobit's account, because that's what really matters here. Did they occur in the lifetime, in the era of Tobit and Tobias? Because that's actually all that is needed for such an ancient text. Come on. They are not being honest as these kinds of issues occur in the modern canon, and they ignore them for those books and attack things Tobit, basically has that are the same. The point is, they can't. Because regardless, these actually all work out on 4 different measures as far as the time frame. So these are not problematic in either event. So let's start with our timeline, 127 years as Tobit's age at death. Tobit would be born, and this is approximate, of course. You can run any of these timelines different ways, but the point is they work out. The events occur within the timeline. This is approximate. So basically, we're pretty certain as far as dates are coming. Hang on, don't worry. But he would have been born about 739 BC. We're extrapolating that. Regarding Jeroboam 1, it's not even mentioned in the KJV. So we're not trying to make that fit because it doesn't need to fit. The criticism already failed. Tobit is then taken into Assyria about 722 BC. And we're pretty much going to keep that date for all of these timelines. And they all work out. That's historically accurate. That's within the days in which Shalmaneser was the king, taking the northern kingdom into Assyria indeed. We have a match there. Tobit is accurate. This means about 705 BC, Tobit was robbed by Sennacherib's administration, and that is Sennacherib's first year of rule. So it seems to be accurate. There you go. This actually works out very well. Tobit is then blinded, and this is where we feel this is firmly 127 years at death for Tobit, because based on that, Tobit would be 58 years old, which all of the texts agree, except for the one from Martinez. Again, remember, that's at 85, and we'll deal with that with the 158 years when we get there. Hang on. But that could make that work too. This also happens to be during Esarhaddon's reign, and boom, there it is, the first year of Esarhaddon, in fact, which is what it's supposed to be. Tobit was blinded by bird droppings into his eyes that very year, and he was 58 years old on this timeline. There you go. Now, this sets up the destruction of Nineveh, which is misconstrued by many. Tobit prophesied that would occur. Now, this did occur in 616 BC, basically. It was, however, not Nebuchadnezzar, but his father, Nabopolassar, who sacked Nineveh. Some think Tobit would be dead for Nebuchadnezzar's reign, in fact. That's one of the points many have made. And they're looking at the wrong king. They've got the wrong test. They don't know what history says. That's the problem. That's not Tobit's problem. That's their problem. Let's leave it theirs. And again, ballpark, give or take, but based on these pretty solid markers, Tobit died about 612 BC. Again, this is the timeline for 127 years of age, and it works perfectly, even for the opposition's demand that Tobit had to be alive for the sacking of Nineveh, though he never says that's the case. Tobias needed to be alive for that, and he would be no matter what. But every marker is hit here, and all is accurate, even in that case. Now, even for those ridiculing based on the other figures, though, guess what? They still work out. Let's take a look at them briefly. For the Catholic number, 117 years for Tobit's age at death. This is the one that Compelling Truth says disproves Tobit, yet it doesn't, so that's not true. It is a lie. And again, he doesn't commit to it, so I'm not saying he's saying it 100%. He doesn't say anything 100%. In fact, he doesn't say anything. It is a worthless blog of nothing. Again, he's looking for the wrong king. That's part of the problem. If we just assume Tobit is born the same year and goes into captivity a bit younger, basically this still works. Keeping the other dates the same, Tobit then dies earlier, about 10 years earlier. But again, that would be in 622 BC, but still not a problem. Compelling Truth, well, can't read. He thinks Tobit had to be alive for Nineveh's destruction, which, again, 127 years, it actually still works out for his criteria that's not even criteria of the story. It says Tobias heard of the destruction of Nineveh. Tobit prophesied that would happen, but it does not say he had to be alive to see the destruction. Again, if he was, if he wasn't, either way, it's actually covered in these timelines. So the 117 years still works just fine on a timeline. That is not an historical error. I mean, how can you go so far as to leap and say that's an historic error when it proves to not be nonsense? Now, if you use the Dead Sea Scroll figure of 112 years from Giza Vermes, again, it's not in the other translation that we showed you. It's assumed by modern scholars, and it's inserted. Okay, get that. But they do not actually have a figure in the fragments, so they added it. There's no question. However, even so, the 112 years, Tobit would just die 5 years earlier if we just kept everything the same, all the markers still in place, and this fits. No, he would not have heard of the destruction of Nineveh, just as he wouldn't if he was 117. But again, the text does not say he had to. Tobias did, and that remains the case no matter what, and there is no historical error here. As long as Tobias was alive in 616 BC, there's nothing wrong with this book historically. And again, the days of Jeroboam, that is a Catholic edition in nonsensical, stupid edition, really, that doesn't exist in the KJV. Let's look at the last one here. Now, with the 158 years for Tobit's age at death, which again we believe is a corruption and a manipulation in the KJV, again, that's occurred in Genesis, so not a surprise when we see those kinds of things. Let's assume, though, that Tobit was born, let's say 20 years earlier, taken the same year, robbed the same year. The only challenge would be when Tobit was blinded, which would be more like 78 years on this timeline, but that fits the 85 years if we just add another 7 to it and, change when he was born 7 years later. It actually still works out. So he wouldn't be blinded at 58 then, he'd be blinded at 85, which fits what Martinez's translation says. It actually still works out. It is not an unthinkable corruption in the KJV, and it's not an actual problem for an ancient text like this. Certainly not something that could be used to discount it as inspired scripture. That's stupid. That would be the dumbest paradigm ever, because if they apply that for Tobit, then they better do it for every other book of the modern canon, which they do not, which is dishonest. He would have been alive for the destruction of Nineveh. Tobit would have in this case as well, and died 11 years later than the first timeline that we ran. So, really, still not problematic at all. The real question here is whether or not in Tobit and Tobias's combined lifetimes, these key events listed in the book all occurred, and the answer is yes, including hitting the marker of 58 years or 85 years, depending on which way you look at it. This is fact, folks. There's not a problem with this timeline at all. It is historical, and it's perfect, really. In either event, it works all four ways. Again, we are sticking with the KJV age of 127 years, and that's what we published, of course, as Tobit's death, which is what we note in the margin note. It's what we use in the chart, and for good reason we even explain in the book why we use it in the chart. This is how you reconcile an ancient text. No scoffing is needed. Tobit's timeline works either way in all four instances, but again, the most likely, the one that is the most compelling, is the 127 years, really. There you go. Next, we'll address the Archangel Raphael. Is he even real? It's hard to believe. So many scholars do not even know this. Then, do demons smell and touch, even killing men? Another very easy question to answer when one knows the Bible paradigm of the origin of demons. Most scholars do not, and that is sad. How did Tobit tithe? Because we get detail in this account. And this is really cool. A lot of people ask this question. We've been holding the answer in a video for this because we knew Tobit went there and did such a good job with this. So he was quite the giver and famous for it, in fact, and he really breaks down the tithe, and we'll go there. Let's understand it. Finally, is there additional historicity for the Book of Tobit as inspired Bible canon, even outside of the Qumran temple priests, which really are the final authority, period, right? Well, remember to like this video and subscribe. We'll cover that next. These videos all coming very soon after this one. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and enjoy our other platforms and websites, all listed in the description box. We have published 10 books in 3 years, and we ain't stopping, including our latest Tagalog version of The Search for King Solomon's Treasure, coming soon in print, but already out in eBook free at ophirinstitute.com. And our recent releases that go with this series, Apocrypha, Volumes 1 and 2, now available in print in the Philippines as well as on Amazon worldwide. Visit apocryphatest.com and download the ebook free, or you can acquire the print version if you wish. You don't have to. More to come. We love you all, and always remember, prove all things for yourself. Yah bless to everyone.